Welcome to our second class on parenting, a topic that we could discuss for many, many hours. And tonight we'll discuss the subject of reward and punishment. It's dramatic words, and we don't really look at it that way. We don't really refer to them that way usually, and perhaps I'm just using them because of the dramatic sound of it. But that's what we feel like sometimes in our homes. This is a very big part of what goes on in the raising of our children. So before we get to actual discussion of reward and punishment, I think it's important to ask, why should we reward? Why should we punish? What's the point of it? Why should we have this feedback that we give to our children? Because that's what reward and punishment becomes. And the simple answer is because isn't that our job? When we educate our children, that we have to direct them. And I want to suggest that this is a true answer, but this is a correct answer, but not necessarily is it so simple. We touched on this, we discussed it at length last week, but I think that it's important to touch on it again now, that there's a very big difference between raising a child and looking after ourselves. Sometimes we react and we behave in a certain way towards a child, not because that child needs this from us, but because of the feeling that we have. We were hurt, we were offended, we are disappointed. He shamed us, she embarrassed me. It's a little kid, but we're hurt by it. And sometimes we have this feeling of righteousness. I have to really put this kid in her place because she'll become a monster. Right? So are you really afraid of the monster? You're trying to protect yourself? What are you doing exactly? And it's difficult. This is a difficult part as a parent, because we become emotionally involved, naturally so. These are our children, these are our feelings, these are our thoughts, and our children play such a big role in our life that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to completely divorce our emotions from the way we speak to our children, the way we raise our children, any interaction with our children. And that's a good thing. Our emotions are a good thing. But we have to make sure that they don't drive the relationship and they don't hijack the relationship. You know, somebody once said, that emotions are like children. We don't put them in the trunk, but we also don't let them drive the car. Right? Sometimes people have this attitude, okay, fine, just completely remove it. Sometimes it's impossible, and many times, usually, it's unhealthy to completely remove emotions. On the other hand, you can't let the children or the emotions drive the car. That's definitely not healthy and very not safe. So now, what does Yiddishkeit say about reward and punishment? We have an obligation. Hashem obligates us to raise our children, to educate our children, and to walk in the path of Hashem. That's our responsibility. To walk in the path of Hashem means to do Torah mitzvahs, to study Torah, to be kind, to be a mensch, to make a kiddush Hashem, to sanctify the name of Hashem by their very behavior. I'm not talking about by doing acts of doing heroics. I'm talking about their simple behavior, their ongoing behavior. We have an obligation as parents to raise children to be that way. Sometimes we have a moment of nachas, and sometimes we might have a moment of disappointment. And this calls from us a reaction. These reactions are necessary. They're crucial. But these reactions could also become detrimental. Both compliments or praise or rewards or punishment, reprimanding. When I say reward and punishment, I don't necessarily mean one form of reward or another, or punishment. Reward has many different ways in which it plays itself out. Reward could just be a compliment. Reward could become into a whole dramatic thank you session. It could become a huge prize. There are many different ways of reward, and we'll hopefully touch on that as we move along. But when I say reward and punishment, I'm referring to the general category of positive or negative feedback. And they're both necessary. Well, there are movements in general society that say, no, just let the child be, and you could hurt the child's self-esteem if you punish a child. Well, what are they going to feel about themselves? How are they going to look at themselves? You're crushing them. Just keep on complimenting them and just keep on telling. What is the right path to take? What's the right direction to take? Yiddishkeit teaches us, when I say Yiddishkeit, in our discussion today, I'm primarily referring to a few texts that were shared by the previous Rebbe, by actually his father, who shared with the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe wrote an essay called The Rules of Education, which are many times teachers and people in faculty, people in schools, definitely Chabad schools, will read that and refer to it. But I think that it's a very good text to read. There's obviously written by the Rabbeim, some very, very valuable information there. One of the things that the Rebbe Rashab writes, or the previous Rebbe writes, that every single artisan, every single person that works in a certain industry has his or her particular tools. A carpenter has his tools that he works with. A doctor, any type of professional has the tools with which they work. What are the tools of a teacher? Praise. Praise. Praise comes as a reaction to something. Together with praise comes the downside of praise. So before getting into the actual reward and punishment and what is considered healthy reward and punishment, what's considered unhealthy, I think it's important to focus on a different point for a moment. And that is, when we talk about our responsibility as parents, something that we confuse or we might forget sometimes. I told my child to do something and they didn't listen. And what's the problem with that? Maybe that's okay. I'm not suggesting that it's okay, but I'm bringing up this question because if we can't answer what the problem with that is, perhaps we're not looking at the education of our children in a proper way. What am I getting at? As parents, we are given the obligation to educate our children. We are not given an obligation to create a little tyranny in our homes. I am the dictator. I pay the bills. You do what I say. You don't like it? Leave this house. As a general rule, sometimes there might be circumstances and events that this is acceptable. I'm talking about as a general rule. Our job is not to become dictators or bosses of our children or grandchildren or nephews or nieces or whatever it is. Our responsibility is to educate. The way we educate, an important way of education is by sharing your thoughts, your feelings, your attitude, and so on. So you'll tell a child, don't go onto the couch with your shoes on. Why do you care? Because the couch will get dirty. Well, someone's coming tomorrow to clean anyway. You're not going to do it yourself, so who cares if the child makes it? But it's disrespectful. You want your child to be a respectful person. You want your child to grow up to be a respectful person. And therefore you educate the child not to do things that are disrespectful. This is something that's very important. Now tomorrow, the next day, the day after, your child is still walking onto the couch. What happens then? The problem is not just that they're with their shoes on their couch. The issue is, the question is, how's their respect? What's going on with their respect towards yourself or towards other people? Do they recognize, do they understand? And as children, some children take easier to direction, some children take more difficult to direction and instruction. Some children thrive in certain areas of instruction. You tell them to take care of their hygiene, or you tell them to eat properly, or they eat with proper decor or proper behavior at the table. They'll do that. And so when it comes to other areas, their interaction with other people or with other children, that becomes a disaster. That becomes a nightmare. So where should you focus? What should you focus on? Our job as children is not just to create a bunch of robots. Our job as parents is not just to create a bunch of robots. Our responsibility as parents is to educate children as to what is right, what is appropriate, what is the right way to live, what is the healthy way to live. And as such, we have to think very, very strong. We have to focus very much on with any interaction we have with our children, what's the short-term result and what is the long-term result? What happens with this behavior or that behavior? We want our children not just to do the immediate getting their shoes off the couch. We want our children to have the long-term understanding that we have to respect other people, we have to respect other people's behavior, we have to respect other people's possessions. So it's not just the immediate thing. Why am I mentioning this as an example? Because sometimes we could be perfect. We create an environment where a child is so dead scared to put their shoe onto that couch because the world will come to an end. But as soon as the fear is no longer there, now I'm going to put all the shoes that I see onto the couch because the fear is no longer there. You've focused on the immediate issue, which is taking those shoes off the couch, but you forgot about the in general environment that you're trying to create. You're trying to educate a child, not create robots. A robot, you could very easily cause that your child shouldn't put their shoes on the couch. You could do that. But you have missed the point. You lost the opportunity. It's not just, okay, you made a mistake, but you lost an opportunity to educate a child about respecting the possessions in your house or in somebody else's house. So every interaction that we have with a child is an opportunity of education, of long-term education. Far-reaching education, because it's not just what they're going to behave like when they're 20, it's how they're going to raise their children, how they're going to raise their grandchildren, please God, and so on. We could become overwhelmed by this. Wow, like every little thing that we do with our child, is it so far-reaching? And then we know that the Rebbe emphasizes that particularly with little children, they're like seeds of a plant, that when there's still a seed, any little scratch, any little thing that you do and it has an effect on it, well, later on in their life, if a tree is to get a scratch, it usually heals itself, it usually cures itself. But this is the honor that Hashem has given us, and the trust that Hashem has given us. If Hashem gave you children, Hashem is saying, I trust you. I trust you that you could do this. And we spoke about this at length last week. So because of this point, because we're not tyrants, because we're educators, it becomes so much more important to focus on the way we give our children feedback. A person will say, no, I'm not going to give my child feedback. What goes through that child's mind? How does a child look at it? And not just how does a child look at it, but how would you look at it? Hopefully at a certain point in our life, we reach a certain point where we can judge ourselves. We give ourselves feedback. This was a good thing to do. This was not a good thing to do. But if we want to change, if we need to change something in our life, if we need to change something in our behavior, it's crucial for us to get feedback. Did I do things right? Did I do things wrong? If I'm trying to make a change. If I don't realize that there's something that needs correction and somebody having feedback is something that's very, very important. But if we don't have healthy feedback, it could become destructive. So what do I mean by healthy or unhealthy feedback? First and foremost, the drive of education must be love and warmth. What do I mean by that? Does love always being fuzzy and touchy-feely and always showering these empty words. No, that's not what love is. But love is the genuine dedication to the well-being of this child. The interest in the well-being of this child. Well, obviously, why else would I be doing it? There could be different motivations. And if you look at your day, sometimes parents will say or do things that really have nothing to do with... I was just speaking to a parent, a friend, and his child is engaged in behavior that is not very good for the child. And the parent, being a responsible, it's an older child. The parent, being a responsible parent, is having a conversation with his child, and sharing with me the conversation that he had, and telling what he was telling his child, that it's really not good for you. The behavior that you're engaged in is not good for you. Very good. They're having a calm discussion about the... And then the father said, and the father came to me because he felt that he wasn't getting anywhere with his son. So, and I'm trying to understand where the father made them. I said, what was the father's mistake? Or where could I give insight, or where could I point out something that should be avoided, or should be added, or should be focused on, should be elaborated on? And then the father says something that I found to be surprising, that he would bring that up even. He said, if you continue with this, you know how embarrassed I'll be? This will be so shameful if people are to find out. My name in the community will be so... Anyway, I stopped the father right there. I said, one second. Is this about you or about your kid? Who is this about? You want your child to change something that clearly your child is engaged in? He knows that's really inappropriate. He's doing it anyway because it's difficult for him to stay away from it. And the reason you want him to stop is because you'll feel uncomfortable in front of your friends? You think that really plays a very big role in his life? Why should it? Why should he make a sacrifice because of something because of a discomfort that you'll have, that at a certain point you'll get over it anyway, and he knows it. That doesn't play a role, and you're making that can be the motivation. But what was going on? The parent is there's nothing. I'm not criticizing this parent, but it's a moment where a parent forgets sometimes that it's really not about you. It's about your child. What is the best thing for your child? And when we approach a child this way, they feel it, they know it, and they accept it. It's much easier for them to accept it, as opposed to if you want them to do things because that'll make you look better in front of your friends. You'll be able to tell your children, my kid does this or doesn't do that. It's really not about you. And at a certain point, they're going to say that to you. If they're not going to say it to you, they'll behave that way. They'll just, okay, fine, you care about that. But it's not really my best interest. So really what we want, and this is really our mitzvah, is to educate this child, that this child should grow and to be the best that they can. And if, God forbid, they're hurting themselves, it's not because I feel uncomfortable with it or because my friends will not respect me as much, but because simply it's not good for you. And the reason that I want you to do something good is not because then I'll be able to show off in front of all my friends and tell them how kind of amazing student you are or amazing kid you are, but because simply that's the best thing for you. And sometimes there is a conflict of interest. And this is something that we have to keep in mind all the time. So number one, the best interest of the child. Others think it's good, others think it's bad. I'm talking about what, our outside, for our acquaintances, what they might think. So now, why should I discipline a child? Why should I punish a child? And how should I do it? What happens if I don't? Why shouldn't I? Well, the reason that we shouldn't discipline our children is because some might think, if I don't discipline my child, they'll love me more, they'll like me more, they'll be closer to me. These are reasons that people think that it's a good idea not to discipline a child. The issue is, though, that a child intuitively knows that their parent is their leader. And what they're looking from their parents is leadership and guidance. They're not looking for a friend in their parent. In fact, when a parent behaves like a friend, children at a certain point start feeling very uncomfortable with that. And at a certain age, your child says, when you bring them to the party, and they'll say, okay, fine, you stay over here, I'll go into the party myself. It's okay, I know the directions myself. And even if they don't do that because they respect you, because of whatever reason it is, a parent has to be a leader, has to be a guide. And if you're taking a tour in the Himalaya, or if you're taking a tour in the in a jungle, and you don't want to make your followers uncomfortable, and therefore you won't tell them that they're making a mistake in the path that they're taking, you're just being a horrible guide. A parent has to point out when a child does something wrong. Otherwise, we're being neglectful in our responsibilities. However, something crucial has to happen. Number one, it has to be done with love, out of the best interest for the child. Number two, never focused on the child, but always focused on the action. In other words, and this is also true in matters of love, complimenting a child, oh, you're such an angel. What am I supposed to do with that? I really know that I'm not an angel. If my feedback, my interaction with my children is not focused on building them, then the things that I'll say will also be things that could not just not build them, it could also hurt them. So everything that I say to them is focused on building them, raising them, putting them, giving them insight, putting them in a direction that I think is most healthy for them, most beneficial for them. So this very much must affect the way I give them my feedback, both positive and negative. Telling a child, you're so smart. And therefore, what am I supposed to do with that? Now let me point out a downside of the possibility of complimenting a child for who they are. Because then what that creates is, I have to create an image that I'm smart, because that's what's good about me. My father or my mother kept on telling me, you're so smart. But now I'm in 11th grade, I'm not really feeling very smart. I'm not really getting the materials. But I still have to be smart, because that's really what's great about me. So what do I need to do in order to continue this image of smartness? I have to work harder, but I don't really get it. And I can't really tell the teacher that I don't get it because I'm smart. So maybe there's a different way of maintaining this persona or maintaining this image, despite the fact that I don't really necessarily get the information. When you praise a child for having a certain talent, what'd you gain? What'd you accomplish? As opposed to praising for effort, work done, something that was challenging for the child and that the child succeeded in. What's the difference between the two? So you could have, and this becomes a real issue, particularly if there's more than one child around. And this is always the case, not even in the house. You have one child, behavior is fantastic, interaction with other people is fantastic. Oh. And then there's the other child that is constantly reprimanded. At a certain point, this good child starts thinking, 1 second, I guess I need to start slacking off in order for me to get attention. Because every child likes to get feedback. We just said earlier from the previous Rebbe that this is something that is... So what do I need to do in order to get feedback? You tell me I'm so smart. I know that I might be I might not be stupid. I don't feel like I'm a genius. So when you tell me, oh, you're so smart, there's something disingenuous about it. There's something empty about it. It feels like you're just pandering to me. You're just trying to make me feel good. Don't try to make me feel good. Dr. Twersky writes about this. I thought it was a very beautiful point. Him or somebody else, I read this a while ago. It was a kid that came in to show a painting, some type of drawing. And what's our reaction? Oh, wow, it's so nice. What are we thinking of the child's intelligence? Do we really think that the child thinks that it's so nice? When you tell a child, when a child shows you a picture, well, this is so beautiful. Is it really so beautiful? And if it's not so beautiful, why are you saying that to the child? So there's a 2-year-old child that maybe you can get away with it, and the child will think that it's so beautiful. As opposed to saying, you did a very good job. I see that you drew a zoo or the sunshine. The way you made the sun is very interesting. This is a very nice way of doing it. Yeah? A child trying to play a piece of music. Oh, fantastic. No, it wasn't fantastic. It wasn't fantastic. Why are you saying it's fantastic? Instead, you picked it up quite quickly. Let me hear it. I like the way you're picking it up. I like the way you're learning it. There's a difference between saying you are this, or the particular activity that you're doing is good, or could get better, or I've seen that you've put in an effort, or that you picked up these notes so quickly. You're improving. So number one, removing it from the person and focusing on the actions. Why is this important? Because at all times a child has to know that what they don't do and what they do does not affect who they are. What do I mean by this? That in your eyes, they are always special, and they're always loved, and they're always cherished, and they're always super valuable. It's not like, if you do this, then I love you. If you don't do that, then I hate you. As your parent, I love you, and I always will love you. This will never ever change. At the same time, because I love you, I want the best for you, and therefore things that you do that are hurtful to yourself, I'll try to point out that I think it's a mistake, and the things that you do that are beneficial for yourself, I'll give you that. So number one, we remove it from the person themselves, and we focus on the actions. And to the person themselves, you are always loved. You are always special. You are always wanted. You're always desired. You're always so important to me. Aside for good communication and aside for the message that it gives to the child, this is the truth. If a child misbehaves, yeah, it might upset you, but you still love the child endlessly. It's to a person that has no children, it's hard to describe. So telling a 15-year-old that I love you, but I hate you at the same time, it makes no sense. But in you, that's what's going on at that point. You're not really hating them. You're really upset about the way they're behaving. So number one, so it's the truth, and also for communication, for the child, it's the most healthy thing to hear and to know. So we're focusing on action. So both the praise and the negative feedback that might be given are always focused on the action, number one. Number two, very, very specific action. So to tell a child, to say to a child, you're such a bad child. And you hear it. And this is really just words. But this is a huge statement to hear. You are so stubborn. Okay, good to know. You're giving information. You're not just venting your feelings. You're giving the child information at that point. And this starts seeping into the child's psyche. I am stubborn. I'm really impossible. You don't think so. I hope. Maybe for that moment you think, but a minute earlier and a minute later you'll say, yeah, I have a challenge that I have to deal with. We won't say, oh, this child is just. But if we don't say that, or rather if we say to a child that you are so stubborn, or you are so moody, or we're educating the child that that's what they are. As opposed to saying, let's focus on actions. Right now, you're behaving stubbornly. Right now, you're being unreasonable. There's a very big difference. And not just focusing on action because that's what helps shape an identity, a self-identity, but also focusing on action helps a child focus on their action. If you say, if my parent tells me, you are impossible, there's nothing I could do about it. You are so stubborn. Okay. And if I am so stubborn, as opposed to saying that there's a different way of behaving. There are different actions to take. These make a huge difference. If I know that putting my shoes on the couch is unacceptable, it might take me 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, but at a certain point, I'm going to be sick and tired of hearing the same thing over and over and over again, and at a certain point I'll stop. If I'm such a stubborn person, why should I stop? I'm so stubborn. It has been determined in the high court that I'm a stubborn person, that I'm an unreasonable person. So very focused on the actions. And the same thing is also with a compliment. I see that you made an effort to share. I see that you made an effort, despite the fact that you got angry, you didn't blow up. That was good. That was good. To a child, this is, I can deal with this. My parent, so this conveys love to a child in an unbelievable way. My parent realized that I struggled. My parent realized how difficult it was for me. My parent knows me. My parent realized that at this moment I was successful. That's not a huge reward, no prizes, but very simple, the recognition, the fact that I am valuable, that I am important, is so important for us in our well-being, in our self-esteem, in our building our identity. So this is in general with regards to reward, to positive and negative feedback. There's a very moving story that the previous Rebbe shared about a child his name was Shaul, who was a very mischievous child. And his father, as I guess was acceptable or common back in the shtetl, had a rimen. He had a belt hanging on the wall, and every once in a while he used to remind the child, look at that, but his father never used it. Until one time. He was a very mischievous child. At one point, his father was home, and as very common back then, there were different animals in the backyard, the front yard, all around the house. The chickens and the cows and the goats. And suddenly, the father hears a huge ruckus. All the animals are running, screaming. There's something going on. And the father looks out of his house, and sure enough, his son is chasing the goats with a stick, hitting them, and chasing the chickens. He's throwing stones at them. His father was horrified. So the son described him. This is the previous Rebbe describes. His father called him into the house and told him to lie down on the table. And he took off the belt from the wall and he hit him twice on his backside. His father left the room. And he described that he remained there lying on the table. And from the next room, he heard his father sobbing. And recognizing how much pain he had caused his father for the fact that he had to use such an extreme, that in itself caused him to make a huge shift in his behavior. Parenting very naturally gets to us. But never ever could we reprimand in anger. I'm so angry at you now you're going to get it from me. What's the problem with that? Because then a child learns. If I'm angry, somebody gets it. I'm so angry with what you just did. I'm so angry I can't even do anything now. Because what I'm going to do will be out of anger. I don't discipline with anger. When I calm down, I'm going to discipline you. What you did was simply unacceptable. Across the red line. Unacceptable. This then, what this father did, wasn't an act of punishment, of revenge, of humiliation, of crushing the child. This became something that built this child. This became something that raised the child, that taught him the importance. And this is really, Shlomo Melech writes, that one that withholds the rod hates the child. What's the point of that? When you love somebody, sometimes when they do something that is simply hurtful to themselves or to their environment or whatever it is, there's going to be negative feedback. It's unhealthy. You see, an extreme example of that is a child running into the street. A liberal parent, it's okay, let the child. No, that's not healthy, that's not right. And the same thing is also in their moral behavior, in their ethical behavior, in their interpersonal behavior. If they become too arrogant, So what do we do then? Feedback. Feedback is something that is crucial. And sometimes we think we have to say or do something dramatic. That's not the case. A child that does something terrible, and sometimes a parent will feel, I need to really, actually, the previous era points this out as well. And sometimes we feel the need to really crush the child. This is child, particularly when they get into their teens, we might be very tempted. Right? We have to really crush this ego, which crush the monster before it grows out of proportion. That's the worst thing. Sometimes we might feel like the way to speak to this child, I have to speak to the child until the child really breaks down and sheds tears, has an emotional meltdown. That's when I really got it. I might feel very good. I really got through. But that's not the case. You didn't get through. You hurt the child. They feel terrible. As opposed to positive and negative feedback. This action was simply unacceptable. And sometimes a person could raise their voice, but without long-lasting, long-winded lectures, without long-winded stories, simply unacceptable. Perhaps you need to explain, perhaps a discussion, but not necessarily an emotional, dramatic scene. This is true in the positive, this is true in the negative. So we speak about focusing on the action, not the person. The person is always good. The person is always desired. The person is always welcome. And personally, I've seen this so many times where a parent's love for a child ultimately turned them around. I've seen this in times in different challenges that people face, whether it's addiction issues or other issues with regards to Yiddishkeit, intermarriage, whatever it is. A real relationship, when a parent has a real relationship with a child, this does amazing wonders. But a healthy relationship is one where the child knows that as a person I'm always wanted, but my behavior there's good behavior and there's bad behavior. Good behavior is welcome and encouraged, and negative behavior is discouraged very strongly. And not everything goes. Not everything is great. So in a few words, what could be avoided and what could be encouraged? Negative feedback is necessary, But just as much as it's necessary, one has to be very careful with it. Now, number one, it always focuses on action, on very particular action. Number two, that it's always building. What do I mean by building? I know that you could do much better than this. The way you just behaved with your friend, with your sister, with your brother was unacceptable. It was selfish. It was not sharing. It was not kind. It's unacceptable for you to behave this way. I know you could do much better. I know that you could behave in a different way. You're not just putting the child out, you're pointing out that this is not good, that the particular action that it was not good, and that there's a different action that they're capable of doing. When we give specifics, a child doesn't have to think. A child doesn't have to wonder. A child doesn't have to doesn't get confused, as opposed to when we do general statements of, you're so selfish, you're so, what did I do? What do you, whatever. So number one, it's particular. Number two, it's building. Number three, it's done with respect. What do I mean with respect? A child deserves respect. A child's a child. But if a child is reprimanded in public, for example, the child doesn't even hear what you're saying. All the child could think about is, where should I bury myself? I feel so humiliated. I feel so ashamed. I feel so, my parent hates me. A parent that would do this to me doesn't like me. You're not trying to fix me. You're not. Because you wouldn't humiliate me like that. When it's done in private, there's a different thing. And this is true with regards to reprimanding. This is also true with regards to complimenting. Some children appreciate being complimented in public. Many children do not. Many children don't like a glare of a public eye on them. And when we compliment them in public, sometimes this might feel, particularly if we compliment them more in public than in private, sometimes this might feel like to a child, you're not really complimenting me. You just want to tell your friends how good I am so that you look good in your friends' eyes, but you don't really care about me. If you want to compliment me, do so in private. I don't like when you say this in public. So the respect for the child and building up the child, that even if I'm saying something that is negative, that this is unacceptable or this is not right or this is not good, it's never, and that's it. I know that you could do different, and what are practical steps that you could do different? And not keeping it and not turning it into a long lecture. Long lectures are not necessary. When a child does something wrong, and you tell them they did something wrong, they get it. Sometimes it depends on what the issue is. They might not fully get it. You could have a discussion about it. But going on and on, how terrible and how woeful and how disastrous it is, and what will happen in the future, it's unnecessary. You could sometimes have a calm discussion about it at a certain point. But at the moment of reprimanding, and the moment of pointing out the negative feedback, this is a point, you could do much better, I expect that from you. You never destroyed the child, you never humiliated the child, you never smashed the child, never crushed the child. And the same thing is also with love. Accepting, or rather giving the positive feedback. Doesn't have to be dramatic, and should never be on the. Again, it's not personal and it's not focused on the person. You're an angel. You're so talented. I don't know what to do with these compliments. You've made an effort in this particular area. Good work. Well done. That is something that is building, as well as with respect. And with a focus on, what is the purpose of me saying this? For the focus of building, not just for nice feelings or for nice excitement or for sweet words. For the purpose of building. And when we have this attitude, when we have this focus at all time that my objective with this child is to build them, then whatever I say to them will be expressed this way, and that'll actually help to build the child. I will conclude with a short incident, I would say, that happened just about now, 1987. There was a lot of activity in 770 when I was a yeshiva bacher. On a particular date, the second date of Kislev, I'll never forget it. There were a bunch of yeshiva bachrim standing in front of 770, and they had a good reason, a good excuse, what they felt was a good excuse, a righteous excuse for being there. And the Rebbe came out on his way to the aisle, to his father-in-law's resting place, and when he saw the yeshiva bachrim standing around, the Rebbe started screaming very strongly. And basically, what are you doing over here? Standing here counting the birds? Why are you not sitting and learning? Very, very sharp words that I was saying then. To an outsider, I don't know how it looks. It might look, wow, frightening, severe. But as one of the Bachman that was standing there at the time, I should say, for me it was okay because that was at least my excuses. It was during our break. Right, so I was there in an okay time. Maybe I should have been learning anyway during our break, but I had a legitimate excuse for why I was there. To me, it was one of the most closest moments with the Rebbe, where my learning was so important that it upset him. That when people weren't learning, it is not just acceptable; it is good for a child to know what is important to the parent and what is near to the parent. But because of that, we have to be very careful to focus on what's important. So if I get upset about everything, my parent just gets upset about everything. Nothing is important. But if there's certain things, like this father that smacked his child, he didn't do it all the time. Usually it was the warning, look, it's there. He was hurting animals. To that father, that was unacceptable. You just crossed the line. To the Rebbe didn't usually scream. I never heard the Rebbe scream like that at a group of people. Now, there are certain things that bothered the Rebbe that sometimes the Rebbe spoke very passionately about. But there was certain areas with regards to halacha, with regards to different things of life and death and so on. Eretz Yisrael. There were certain things that the Rebbe spoke. But to a group of people that, because of their behavior, it was the only time I ever heard of it. Personally, the only time I experienced. But that pointed out to me how much there was concern, cares about how much am I sitting and learning, and how much learning is important. Our emotions are very important to be involved in our relationship. They can drive the education of our children, but they must definitely be there. And when we try to focus ourselves, as we spoke last week, to think every day about the great gift that Hashem's given us and the honor that Hashem's given us, then we could ensure that the feedback that we give is building, lifts up, and please God, we have children that are well behaved and feel good about themselves, feel good about their parents, and grow up to have a lot of nachas of them. Thank you very much. Next week, Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll discuss self-esteem, something that is can never be something that I think deserves attention. Please.
If the situation repeats, and quite often, can you sometimes not give a feedback, especially if it's a negative feedback?
That's a very good point. Not everything a child does needs feedback. Definitely at earlier stages of their life. But this is true of any time. Not every time a child misbehaves do we need to make a deal out of it. 100%. Sometimes, and sometimes we have to be careful that the child is not using our feedback as a form of communication. Our negative feedback as a form of communication. Sometimes a child sees that when we're correcting them, the negative feedback, we do it with passion. And we will spend more time with them. And we'll become very engrossed in their life. It's a pretty good feeling to have somebody that's so concerned about me and somebody that's talking to me. Yeah, they're saying things that are, but it's my parent and I like when they talk to me and I like when they... Sometimes a child will pick up that the negative becomes is much more exciting than the positive. So first of all, we have to make sure that the positive feedback is just as consistent, right? The consistency is of crucial importance. I didn't mention this earlier. Thanks for pointing that out. When we have certain negative feedback, what could be a punishment? Sometimes a punishment. Sometimes, oh, you're going to get it from me now. Oh, you're going to. Sometimes it's not the dramatic, and on the contrary, the primary thing that makes change in our lives, for the most part, is consistency. If a child knows that every time they walk in through a door, if they don't close the door, they're going to be told about it over and over and over again, at a certain point, it's like, I don't want to be nudged. But if there's a certain repercussion, that if they don't close the door, something happens, they have to go back out and come back in. They don't want that. They want to walk into the house and just relax. But if they know that no matter whether they're tired, whether they're not tired, whether you're in a good mood or in a bad mood, or it's Yom Tov or Shabbos, if they walk into the house without closing the door behind them, they're going to have to walk back out again and close the door. Right? That becomes the punishment. That is a motivation for them to do the right thing. In other words, a punishment is not something that I'm going to teach you a lesson of who's a boss. I go back to what we started off with. It's not about I'm going to be the boss. It's about I want to teach you something. So if education is about showing you who's boss, so yeah, the harder the punishment, that really makes the point. If you don't listen, you're out of the house. That really makes the point that you're the boss, you're the tyrant, you're the dictator. But education is not about a dictatorship. Education is about pointing the right direction. So smaller, so to speak, punishments, but consistent. In other words, a certain behavior is never acceptable. Sometimes you could ignore it. But at the point when you decide that this reached a point where you need to discipline, it doesn't have to be something huge, but something that creates discomfort, something that is unpleasant to the child. Nobody likes to be in unpleasant situations. But if I know that it's just an unpleasant thing one time, and next time you'll forget about it, and you or in 2 times, or when my father gets home, or when my mother gets home, then a child plays with it. The most important thing in discipline is consistency. I know that there's going to be, these are going to be, I'm not going to like the repercussions. I'm not going to like what's going to happen afterwards. I'd rather not do that. Obviously, there's going to be a time where the child slips up anyway, because children as adults make mistakes, and sometimes our emotions or our moods get to the best of us. 100% that's. But the general rule is consistency. So what is an appropriate punishment? I think something small, but something that's unpleasant.
So can you let it go once a child didn't close the door?
100%. We have to be very flexible when it comes to education. What I mean flexible is we have to look at the reality. Sometimes a child's in a bad mood. It's really not who they are. They're really they're not really in their environment. They're not really in their element. Or they're not feeling well. They're having a hard time in school. Whatever it is. At a certain point, we have to. But there's a certain time where but the rule is such and such, and sometimes but that is again that's very focused. It's not like you forgot about it. Right now, you made an exception. Right? So there is that definitely there has to be that understanding, but at the same time, consistency is what's crucial. And the same thing is also consistency in the positive. We don't make dramatic scenes out of it. It's going to be recognized. When I make an effort is recognized. Work is recognized. And what we do by sharing positive feedback with workers, no matter how brilliant our children are, they're going to have to work in order to succeed. No matter how sociable they are, there are going to be situations where it doesn't really go their way. So when we tell them, oh wow, you're such a people's person, you know how to get on with people so well, yeah, that's what I am. And if somebody doesn't go according to my plan, or something doesn't go according to my plan, then I blow a fit, or but focused on, you know what, I saw that you made an effort to include this child in, even though this child behaved not so nice to you, you still did the right thing by X, or you still behaved respectful to that child. It's very, very specific. And this then breeds the understanding and the knowledge of what happens down the line.
older kids, when they did something inappropriate, really inappropriate, how do we punish them? And you feel like they need to be punished?
Very good question. It's a very good question. First of all, it depends on the age, and depends also, and it's also
teenagers.
Oh, you mean to say there's a time where teenagers don't do things inappropriate?
Don't scare me.
And it depends what kind of inappropriate it is. But something that strongly inconveniences them is not a bad thing.
But like what?
Um,
Considering the fact that they're in the religious community, they hardly don't have games and like movies and those kind of things. They don't go out much, and you know.
What would be?
Don't feed them.
I'm sorry.
Don't feed them.
Don't feed them. all you have for the next week is bread and water.
No meat for you.
I don't have the answer offhand. It's a very good question. And at a certain point, actually says in halacha, that in the teen years, the parents shouldn't smack their kids. Even though technically, if they're in your house, technically you feel that they did something wrong, technically you could. But there's a certain point where it doesn't carry its weight. It doesn't. How to discipline? My approach would be more to have a very serious conversation with such a child, and ask this child to or tell this child that they have to come up with something. And it's simply, to repeat, it's simply unacceptable. Unacceptable. And you can share the way you feel. You know, as I said, the emotions can't drive, but they have. If I see that I need to build the child, and they did something that's unacceptable, then a very serious conversation, and not a one-time thing, and to say that I'm going to figure out what the consequences will be. If you have any suggestions, I'm open to it. Something like that. Now, what it could be, it's hard for me to believe that a child doesn't, even a religious community, doesn't have certain certain privileges or certain things that they don't really must have or something.
So what do? Just take them out like for a certain period of time?
100%. 100%. You just lost your privilege. This is if at the same time though, it can never be in a way where the child or the teenager is destroyed. Where I tell the child, you know what, I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust you. Okay, fine. Don't trust me. But we have to be very aware of, on the one hand, calling them on what they did wrong and pointing that out to them and pointing out how unhealthy or inappropriate or negative or destructive it is to them or to society or whatever it is. But at the same time, we always have to remember that from you, I expect much better. And even if it doesn't happen this time, but when we keep on driving this point, it's a point of that Yiddishkeit keeps on. Moshe Rabbeinu keeps on telling us. It's something that we heard from the Rebbe so many times. You're a Yid, you're a neshama, your identity is beautiful. Your identity is beautiful. From you, I expect better. So on the one hand, yeah, this is wrong. So even when the child will answer back, in whatever, or if they won't answer back, they'll just sit there rolling their eyes, and you can't. Don't do that. At a certain point, they're going to do something. Right? They're going to be. That's why I think short sessions are much more beneficial. Number one. Number two, your disappointment in this particular behavior, or how unhealthy or how terrible or hurtful this particular, to them or to anybody else, this particular behavior is. And from you, I expect much more. From you, I expect much better. What that tells a child is you're not crushing them, you're not hurting them. And because, to serve as a reminder or to serve as encouragement, you're going to lose a certain privilege. You know, you're not banished. You're not destroyed. But to lose a certain privileges, your life won't come to an end. Well, it'll serve as a reminder that to bring the best out of you and not to allow the darkness to come out of you. In this way, because at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, what would it take for me? What would it take for me to change? If I did something that was really not good, and my parent or anybody else would want me to fix that or not to make that mistake again, what would it take? You would want somebody to tell you, you know what? You want somebody to call you on it. Sometimes this is true in horrible crimes, that sometimes criminals will do things in the open simply because they want to be caught. They want to stop and they simply can't stop themselves. So we want somebody to tell us, God forbid I'm not, but in a small way, and also in our life, sometimes we do something wrong and we want to be caught because we want to stop ourselves and we can't. So somebody calling us out is the best thing for us, and sometimes that's what we're looking for. Calling us out, but don't crush me. I won't handle that. Don't turn me into a monster. I'm not a monster. I'm really a good person. But for what reason or another, I overlooked my being a good person. I allowed my shortcomings to get the best of me. So help me bring out the best and help me overcome the challenges. And this is really what you want to have a conversation. At the same time, you're not having a chat between friends. You're having a chat as a leader, as a guide. I'm your guide. I'm your coach. And what are we going to do? This is unacceptable. And from you, I expect, and I know that you could do much better than this. You have something within you. You have your kindness within you. Let's say a teenager that behaved, that's bullying somebody else. I'll just use bullying could be an example of whatever. There could be different issues, but a teenager that stole, okay? Unacceptable. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to the owner of the store and you're going to tell him, "Oh, but he might arrest me." Yeah, he might arrest you. That's what happens. But you're an honest person. You're an honest kid. I know you. You were tempted, and unfortunately, you didn't overcome your temptation. It doesn't make you into a bad person. Just at this point, you lost you misjudged, and you can't make this mistake again. So therefore, you're going to go to the store owner and you're going to tell him that you took something, and see where that goes. Now, you might want to have a chat with the store owner in advance to maybe take it, whatever. Depends what the circumstances is. But there's a certain owning up to what you did, finding a healthy way in which they could be reminded not to do that thing again, or to behave differently. And I think that teenagers, when they are engaged, they could come up with some good, and when they're being honest, they could come up with some very good ideas of how they could be helped when they're engaged, when they're being honest. In other words, when they turn 23. And that's why I think keeping it short is something that's very important, unless they start talking. But when we communicate with our children with respect and expressing the desire that we want to build them, not, God forbid, crush them, that helps. And sometimes it's a conversation that needs to happen through somebody else, and maybe that's a direction to think as well. Particularly teenagers, many times have a hard time hearing from their parents, and maybe it could be one of the directions. One of the things that could be discussed is, okay, fine, we're not going to be discussing. You're going to be discussing with person X, and you're going to work it out with that person, because this is simply unacceptable. There has to be done in a way, with discretion. They shouldn't think that their parents are telling everybody about their misdeeds or the mistake that they made. But a certain person, whether they're a teacher in yeshiva or whatever, a past teacher that they connected with, or a rabbi, or whatever it is, a certain person that they respect. So this person you're going to deal with this person, but you also have to be careful that those people shouldn't be manipulated. That's the teenagers is very exciting. But again, education is not something that it's not tyranny. I'm repeating that because it's something, especially teenagers. We speak to a teenager and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But it's not the case. Even if you didn't get somewhere today, if you're careful with your words, I mean, even if you're not careful, that'll be the case. But your words will be remembered. If not the particular words, if it's dramatic in particular, if they messed up and they know that they messed up, what you say and the way you react will be remembered for a very long time. And therefore, even if it didn't have your desired effect today, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean that in a year or two, at a certain point, they'll turn around and say, you know what? Yeah, she or he was really right. It's not. And that's where davening comes into the picture. We daven to Hashem that, and this is something that there was a chassid. The story can't be underemphasized. There was a chassid. His name is Rabbi Zalman Gurari, who at a certain point he had a lot of. He was a mover and shaker. He could get things done. And the Rebbe's brother-in-law once needed something done, and he needed the kindness of Rabbi Gurari to help him with that. For some reason or another, Rabbi Gurari had to be motivated to do that particular thing. I don't know what this thing was, but he had to be motivated. So the Rebbe's brother-in-law said that if you help me with this, I'll get you a private audience with the Rebbe, and you'll be able to ask for whatever you want. Okay? So he was like, wow, this is amazing. Rabbi Gurari had pretty free access with the Rebbe as well. But this was an opportunity. So he got that thing done for the Rebbe's brother-in-law, and then he came into the Rebbe's office for the private audience. And the Rebbe asked, so the brother-in-law told the Rebbe, okay, fine, here's a person, this is my deal with him, that if he does it, he could ask for whatever he wants. So the Rebbe asked so Rabbi Gurari, what do you ask for? So at that time he was involved. I think it was a matter of business that wasn't really going well, so he asked. So the Rebbe told him that if you have an opportunity to ask for whatever you want, you should ask for chassidus and nachas from your children. Right? This is when we daven to Hashem. What really the most important thing that we want is to have nachas, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. In our davening, at any point, is to have nachas from our children, Yiddish nachas, not just to have nachas so that they express their neshama, that they get in touch with that they live a life of Torah and mitzvahs. Davening plays a very big role, not just because Hashem runs the world and this is something that's important to us, because with our efforts, our children have to be accepting of that. And we ask Hashem that we should say the right words, and we shouldn't, we should choose the right way of communicating with them, and that Hashem should open their hearts so they should hear the wise things that we say, or the good things that we say, and that it should have its desired effect. We don't daven to Hashem that, I should be able to do whatever I want, and then my children should grow to be good Jews. We daven to Hashem that we should fulfill our responsibility, and that we should be successful in fulfilling our responsibility.